I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. I apologize for the delay in this. It is now day 4 after the council meeting, and I'm just now recording this recap, which I'm about to release. It was a pretty heavy council meeting, a lot to discuss. I'm going to start with the one that garnered the most overwhelming citizen opposition. So this was a zoning request, a rezoning request for 6.8 acres, I believe it was, at the northeast corner of Jupiter and Los Rios. I used to live right there in Timberbrook Estates for 15 years. All those folks were my neighbors for a very long time. The rezoning request was to rezone it for multifamily, low-income, quote-unquote, affordable housing, which, as you know, means taxpayer-subsidized housing in this context, and 80 multifamily units. So this property was rezoned single-family for 22 units back in 2016, but nothing was ever done with it. Now the request was made to rezone it to the low-income multifamily housing. So over 800 people registered opposition to this. Staff recommended against it. Planning and zoning denied it 8-0. And yet this council, including myself, I will fully own it, passed it unanimously, overrode the rejection, overrode the denial by planning and zoning, which did, by the way, require a supermajority of council to do. I didn't do this lightly at all, and a lot of people are feeling hurt and angered and betrayed, and they feel that we turned their back on them, and they have every right to feel this way. Speaking only for myself, what I did to vote against that, despite numerous issues with developing such a project there, and really, I think, developing any residential there, even the single family that was approved in 2016, there are just numerous issues with developing on that corner, and I know because I've driven by there hundreds and hundreds of times. I'm intimately familiar with it. And those issues, most of which have nothing to do with our comprehensive plan, which was passed just last November, less than a year old. So why did I vote this way? There are certain things said in executive session, as you know, if you've watched this recap for any length of time, that I can't reveal because they're an executive session. It's actually illegal for me to say so. But I will say to anybody who knows me at all, anybody who has followed me at all, you are right to feel hurt and angered and betrayed. And please believe me when I say that I would never have cast this vote this way, that I not believe sincerely and deeply that it was truly in the best interests of our people and the comprehensive plan that we fought so hard to achieve through multiple election cycles, the repeal of Plano tomorrow, and the development and passage of the new comprehensive plan. Like I said, less than a year old. If I did not feel it was in the best interest of this city, by which I don't mean the city government, I mean the city and our people, I would not have cast this vote. And I know that's hard to understand. I know that leaves a lot of questions and still a lot of anger. And I'm not asking anybody to forgive me for this. I don't know that I'll ever forgive myself for it. But I do feel it was the right thing to do. And you know I've always shot you straight. You know that I've always been very candid with you. So please believe me when I say this. I know that may be hard, and I know for many that may be impossible. But that's why I have, from day one, from the day I announced my candidacy, vowed to always be truthful with you. And to this day, at the very top of my Facebook page, I have pinned an open challenge, an open invitation for anybody to provide a shred of evidence that I have ever been dishonest or misleading in representing you. 0 takers to this day, and that's been up there since before I was elected. I took it down just for a month to say thank you with a thank you post, and then I put it right back up. So it's been there for over 3 years now. And I'm very proud that nobody has been able to cite a single shred of evidence that I have ever been dishonest, because I haven't been, and I'm not now. And I keep that up there to make it easy for people to hold me accountable if I ever become a politician. As I've said before, I refuse to be a politician. Guy who represents his constituents is where I draw the line. And I've done my best to represent you here, and to do so, to try to preserve the voice of the people of Plano, I deliberately ignored the voice of the people of Plano, and it sickens and pains me. That's all I'm going to say on that, and I know it's not enough. But I will move on to the next zoning case, which I did vote against, though that doesn't make up for the first zoning case. This was a request by Medical City Plano to add 4 more stories on top of an existing 4-story building for a total of 8 stories, and to move the heliports, 3 of them, from the ground level right now to the top of that building for helicopters. Now, in an unusual turn of events, the property owners right next door, the condos and the apartments, hired an attorney and an architect to explore additional plans. So at the meeting, we were presented with those alternate plans. And while unusual, I felt we were put into really a falsely framed position of choosing between 2 plans, but that's not what we were there for. We were either there to approve Medical City Plano's proposal or reject it. So a lot of people, what's noteworthy is that all of the people who spoke in favor of Medical City Plano's proposal, they talked about how badly the space was needed and saving lives and everything, which is all right. Nobody who spoke against the proposal rejected the idea that Medical City Plano needs more space. They do. I said this myself. Most of the people who spoke in opposition acknowledged that it does need more space. It's a level 1 trauma center, and if I'm getting the tiering right for the trauma center, and it has the best burn center for 11 bajillion miles. And it's the only place in probably the entire galaxy that has both. Not really the galaxy, but you get the idea. And so it absolutely does need more space because it's not just the growth of the population of Plano, which has not actually grown that much population-wise since 2018 when the 4-story building was approved. And they said, we're fine with this being 4 stories. It doesn't need to be 8 stories. They requested 8 stories initially at the time in 2018. It's because so many more people in the surrounding area come to Medical City Plano for care. So everybody acknowledged that they needed more space. So what was before us and why I voted no was I felt that they did not sufficiently explore alternatives to meet the concerns of the people immediately next door. And I mean immediately. There's no green space between the hospital and the condos there. So I did vote against that. It passed anyway, so that's going to be built. The third zoning request was for a Huffhines Communities project for single-family attached homes off of Thunderbird Lane. That's near, close to Park and Alma, if I remember the map correctly. Right now, it's largely a green field, but a community of 2-story single-family attached homes was proposed, and I'll jump to the conclusion. It was unanimously approved there. However, this was the third of 3 zoning requests which had more citizen opposition than support in the registered opinions. So I always care about the voice of the people of Plano, and I'll tell you with this one, I've already explained the first 2. With this one, a lot of the comments that I read from citizen opposition expressed 3 concerns. One is that it was in a floodplain. That is correct. However, being in a floodplain or near a floodplain does not mean nothing can be built there. A flood study has to be done, and it will be done before they can actually build anything here. And if there's any deviation from the prior flood study, they will not be able to build as planned. They'll have to change the nature of their development and the plan to conform to the new flood study. So that is going to be a requirement. Moreover, I confirmed that a flood study doesn't just measure the impact to the immediate property, but quite literally the downstream impact from when water drains off due to less impermeable surface there. So that will be taken care of, and being in a floodplain just means that there are certain places that cannot be built because that's the prime runoff area for floodwaters. So the second thing people registered opposition to was multifamily being built there. However, this wasn't multifamily, which is an opportunity for me to distinguish multifamily from single-family attached. So single-family attached are like townhomes. We have those in a few pockets of Plano. Single-family detached is what we have throughout much of Plano. Large single-story homes with a fair amount of space between them. Now, multifamily is units stacked one atop the other. And in very few cases are there single-story multifamily, but they can be 2 stories, 5 stories. Now, there is such a thing as, by the way, single-family attached that are multiple stories stacked on top of one another. Condos is a great example for this, but these condos can be owned. Apartments are rented. And throughout all of Plano, where we have apartment developments, they are largely developed to rent. But in this case, each unit was 2 stories tall, so it wasn't one unit stacked on top of another unit. It was single-family attached, and it did conform to the comprehensive plan, and was not very dissimilar from what was already built around it. The third so the idea that they're opposed to more multifamily, it wasn't multifamily. The third complaint, and I hear this and I sympathize with it to a degree, is that they want to keep the green space we have in Plano. Well, I would like that, except we can't tell a property owner that they have to keep their property green and just keep paying the taxes on it because we like the green space. So the city could explore purchasing areas for parkland, but we try to make sure it makes sense as parkland. And likewise, of course, the residents don't want to buy it to keep it green. So as much as I sympathize with wanting to keep Plano as green as possible, that's just not a viable option. So I did approve this, and the main thing, which I said on the dais, was I've long said that the biggest thing exacerbating housing prices in Plano, and it is expensive, is the dichotomy of housing types that we have. We have predominantly, not universally, but predominantly either large two-story single-family homes or apartments. Some of our older homes are 1-story, but they are still single-family detached. So we've got the larger footprint single-family detached homes, or we have apartments. What we really lack is smaller footprint ownership options like townhomes, like single-family attached, like cottage communities. Now, the reason this artificially drives up housing, and by the way, we are at about 33% multifamily now. Like, out of all of our housing, a full third of it is multifamily, and that's without projects like Cullen Creek or Beacon Square coming online yet, so it's going to be more than a third. We are already at 41% rental. Now, some of those rentals are single-family, like short-term rentals, for instance, or actually just single-family long-term rentals. So 41% of all of our housing is rental. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that people who rent rather than buy in a market like North Texas are just not putting down the same roots as people who buy and just plan to be here for fairly long term. So I've said that tends to destabilize a community when you don't have people with the same vested interest. And again, that's not rocket science. Somebody asked me once, a reporter asked me once, if I can cite any peer-reviewed studies to show that people who rent don't stay longer than people who buy. I'm like, no, I haven't searched for any, but I'm not aware that any have been done. Are you aware of any peer-reviewed studies that have concluded that water is wet? It's like there's a certain level of questioning you don't even need to go into. But anyway, what it does is it shuts out younger people, either single or newlyweds without children, from the more expensive housing that's too big for their purposes right now, if they're just by themselves or just the two of them. And a lot of our housing is for people with families, 1, 2, 3, 4, 11 kids. I have 3 myself. And then there are the apartments. So there are many apartments with people with children, They're more cramped than the single-family homes, but then empty nesters don't have any smaller footprint ownership options to downsize into. So some seniors, when they have an empty nest, they want to rent. They just don't want to worry about the repairs or anything. A lot still want to own their home. They just don't want the big 2-story home all their kids grew up in. But they have nowhere to go if they want to stay in the community, if they want to stay in Plano. So what this does is it prohibits the younger people from moving into a starter home, something much smaller, but allows them to live in, stay in for 5 to 10 years while building equity. When you're paying a mortgage, you're still building equity. When you rent, you get zero equity, none, squat. And then, so it shuts them out to begin with. And then when they finally have a family big enough and have the financial footing to buy one of the larger homes, those larger homes are not being freed up by the seniors because those seniors have nowhere to go if they want to downsize and they don't want to rent an apartment. And so they stay in those homes. So that reduces the housing supply. And if anybody understands anything about Economics 101, it's if you have limited supply with increasing demand, the cost goes way up. That's not the only aspect, but that's the biggest aspect of what's happening in Plano and has been for years, is a dichotomy of housing. So all of this to say that the more we can diversify the types of housing we have, the better off we'll be, because everybody will have the level of housing that best meets their needs. That is not to say that everybody who wants to live in Plano can live in Plano, because Plano is one of the top cities in the country for just about anything you can name. So it's in high demand. And if we want to allow everybody who would want to live in Plano to live in Plano, then it will no longer be Plano. It'll be one of the other cities that not as many people want to live in. So that's the balance that we have to strike. This is the biggest thing we need to do to make housing more affordable. And as you know, I do not say affordable housing without air quotes because it means one of two things: either taxpayer subsidized housing or housing that is affordable without subsidies. But they are often deliberately conflated. So those were all the zoning cases, and all three passed despite more citizen opposition than citizen support. Of course, I've spoken to all of that, but it still doesn't pain me any less. I do want to address the Pride Festival that happened in Plano last weekend. So I knew that there was going to be a Pride Festival, and I am assuming that the city staff who granted the permit thought that all that would be happening was what was actually in the public event notice. Live music, dancing. They explicitly said family friendly, and they explicitly said 12 and under free. So it was a private event held on city property, public property, and in view of the public. So this is all important to preface this. And had it actually materialized as it was billed in the event notice, I wouldn't have a problem. I don't think city staff, well, I know city staff didn't have a problem anyway. The permit was granted. So I'll also say that just because it's a private event, the Balloon Festival, which is going on right now, is also a private event. You have to pay admission to get in there. But it's also on city property. And it's also in view of the public, even though if you have to view it from behind a fence, maybe. So all of that to say that it's a Pride Festival, and I said this on Monday when all this came to my attention, this Monday. Number one, I really don't much care what consenting adults do in private. I may not like it. I may like it. Doesn't matter. I am an ardent defender of the First Amendment. Each of the clauses of the First Amendment, by the way: freedom of speech, press, assembly, and religion. What I am not in favor of is deliberately targeting children with public indecency. So there are a few things that featured at this Pride Fest. Probably the most pronounced one was a table of, I guess, magnets, maybe buttons, stickers, something, with really overtly sexual material on them. Not like photographs, but verbal content, text content, really overtly nasty and sexual. At kid height. Now I'm told second or third hand that there was an 18 or over only sign near that table. I don't care. If you need such a sign, it doesn't belong on city property and it doesn't belong in view of the public. If you want to have that stuff, do it in a private club. There was a free STD check van there, I'm told. So like right out in the open, this isn't just a county health presence and we're offering services, free health services. This was a free STD check. And then there was a drag performance, which actually in the drag, called a drag queen, I guess that's what they're called, pulled kids out, children, really legit children, out to dance. All in public, all on city property. I'm not okay with this. Again, I gotta reiterate this. Consenting adults, do what you want to do in private. That kind of stuff, that overtly sexualized event, does not belong on city property. Likewise, some people have tried to say, well, what's the difference between a drag performance in public and a cheerleader? Well, call me prude, I do think cheerleaders are underdressed. And while that may be provocative and maybe sexy, there is a world of difference between sexy and sexualized. And everything I saw after the fact about that event, it was overtly sexualized and it was explicitly drawing in children, deliberately drawing in children. It was called family friendly. It said children 12 and under get in free. Do not target our children. Our children are, above all, impressionable and malleable. So I have no doubt but that this stuff was a full-throated attempt to normalize this and expose children to it. Now, the event organizer, or the co-founder of North Texas Pride, spoke at Tuesday's council meeting, and first he just started complaining about the protesters who showed up, which if that's what you lead with, then I have doubts that you really mean anything that follows. And he acknowledged that there were concerns with some of the people there. Well, again, I might think you're talking about the protesters. And then he talked about, maybe some better screening policies for vendors. So I assume he was talking about the table with those disgusting magnets. But even if he knew, and I'll allow that the city didn't think any of this was going to happen when they granted the permit. But even if I allow that he didn't realize any of this was going to happen, the moment it started happening, he knew it was happening. And to the best of my knowledge, nobody tried to do anything about it. Nobody tried to stop it. So this is something I will be pursuing. This is our community, and these are our kids. So keep our kids out of it, and do not try to push that kind of overtly sexualized stuff on them. I guess I'll close on that. We did have several speakers again about short-term rentals. I've spoken at length about that, but this is some pretty heavy stuff. And I promise you that I will keep fighting to do what's in the best interest of our community and our people. I'm Shelby Williams with Plano City Council. Thank you and God bless.